ahead and get started. So I am not Patience, and she is not here today. And I'm sure you have all heard that Patience is now the new executive director at HDC. She's taking a well-earned little vacation on the in-between, and she will be coming back on Monday as our new executive director. So the next time you see her, that will be her hat. So I'm going to do the land acknowledgement here. We would like to open this convening by recognizing that we are in the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. And then just in terms of kind of some general hellos, I think everybody here right now has been here before. We were going to have a new member coming today from Catholic Housing Services. And if that person shows up, then they can introduce themselves, but maybe we just go through and do a real fast hello introduction to everyone in case anybody's unfamiliar. I am Bambi Travis, she, her, HDC, doing project management on this. So feel free to reach out with me with any questions or concerns. And then I'm going to just go ahead and call out across my little grid here. So Perry, would you mind introducing yourself, and then Alistair?
All right, I get to be number one. Awesome. Well, thank you. Hello, everybody. Perry England with McDonald Miller. Good to be here.
And I'm Alistair Jackson with O'Brien 360. Also glad to be here.
And then we'll do Steve and then Sandra.
Steve Gelb, Emerald Cities Collaborative.
And Sandra Mallory, the City of Seattle's Office of Sustainability.
And Seth and Nicole.
Seth McKinney, Ecotope.
Hi, Nicole Ballinger, she, her, City of Seattle, in the office, hence wearing a mask. Nice to see you all.
And then Madeline and Julie.
Hi, Madeline Kostich with Seattle City Light.
Hi, Julie Nielsen with Interim CDA.
And then we have Jennifer, and it looks like James has been able to join us. And then Jennifer, if you want to go ahead and just give us all a quick hello, and then James, maybe a little introductions. Or we can go alphabetical. James, if you can hear me, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself since you're new to the task force. Okay, well, we have Jennifer from City of Seattle, and James is coming to us from Catholic Housing Services, and I'm sure we'll hear back from them. And then we have Ryan. We're just doing a quick hello introduction. And James, I see you now. Do you want to go ahead and give us a hello? Oh, and you're muted.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm glad I could make it and get finally connected. I'm James Hill, and I'm with Catholic Housing Services. I'm the new facilities director there. And I'm currently on the road visiting properties in Whatcom County. So I'm glad I was able to make time to attend this meeting.
Thanks for being here. And I think we'll just go ahead and move forward. Unless Ryan, you'd like to say hello, Julie, Jennifer.
Hi, sorry, a few minutes late. With the Raffin Company, general contractor here, involved with HDC for quite a long time. So looking forward to some more good discussion here.
All right, well, I'm just going to move us forward with some announcements around communication touch points that are happening around the BPS project. This is probably more than you want to know, and it's going to go by real fast. The only three things that are probably more of import I've put in the chat here. So Our HDC quarterly member meeting is happening this Friday. We will be doing an announcement around the BPS project just to make sure that that's getting, top of mind for our members. And I hope you all will be able to join, help us get to our quorum number, and the links there in the chat. And then we are sending a board letter to the membership to again highlight the project and get it on everyone's radar. That will be happening next week when Patience is back. We'll also have OSE, I believe Sandra is going to go ahead and present to our policy advisory group at the end of the month, so that again, we're getting that voice out about what you all are doing here in the task force and seeing if anybody else would like to join in it. And then we have our annual celebration happening this year. It's going to be in person. So if you actually wanted to meet each other, you could definitely register and go. If that doesn't work for you, it's hybrid. So we will live stream it as well. And there's a link there that'll be happening on the 28th. Sorry, the 29th. And then we will be starting a new website around the BPS project on our HDC website. It'll be happening the first week of April. So you can look for that. And we will also be sending an update letter to our membership to let everyone know where we are in this project, what we've done, what we have to go to, and that's going to happen that first week of April as well. Lastly, we have 3 events. OSE is going to have their public open house. That's going to be happening on the 5th. I put the link in the chat. We also have 2 Learn at Lunches scheduled for our HDC members, one in April on the 18th. And one in June on the 5th. And those will, basically kind of be an update and input scenario in April. And then hopefully we'll have some preliminary recommendations to share out in June. So those are all the announcements I have. And we'll just move forward here with Steve. He's going to give us a status update on the asset management research he referenced last time. He was moving forward with going to small building owners to see what other information he could receive. So,
This will be a very short update. We wanted to go to smaller building owners because we were concerned they might have different levels of resources to apply to complying with a building performance standard. And the fact that they have so few resources, probably why only one of them has answered my survey so far. So I'm not going to report on that because that's not statistically relevant yet. So I'll be following up with them. And what we're really trying to understand is, do they do their own capital needs assessments? Do they do their own planning for major projects, retrofits, maintenance, et cetera? And if they work outside, who do they work with? Because we'd also like to talk to some of the firms that do the planning and capital needs work with them, so we understand what the burdens on them, on these small organizations will be that is different than some of the larger housing folks who are represented here. So not much of a report. Hopefully I'll have more information soon.
We'll go ahead and move forward then with Alistair, who's going to give us an update on where we are in the audit process and then ask some feedback from everyone here based on that.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Bambi. Just making sure that I'm getting the right stuff on the screen. So you are seeing a slide from me? Yes. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so just a quick run through. This actually the same slide, almost the same slide I used a couple of months ago when we introduced the audit phase, just basically to kind of run through quickly again for people who maybe weren't in that conversation. The intent really with the building audits is both quality control and quality assurance. So quality control to make sure that the data we're basing analysis on is good data. Quality assurance to make sure that the information that we generate, the deliverables are good because we have a good understanding of the buildings that we're studying, what the challenges are, what the systems are, and so on and so forth. So pre-audit, we've done a whole series of analysis using the existing benchmark data, using information from both the Office of Sustainability and Environment and also the Office of Housing. From that, we've been able to tease out a group of about 60 odd affordable housing buildings in the city of Seattle that we have at least a 12-month snapshot of solid, reliable data on. And then we use that as the basis for identifying typologies and buildings that represent those typologies. We're now also pulling as-built drawings from providers where they're available, and other information such as recent CNAs, weatherization info, and so on. So all of that kind of happening in the pre-audit phase. And then we're in the process right now of scheduling audits. We still haven't started auditing, but we are now scheduling with various people. So close to being in process. We're a couple of weeks behind where we had hoped to be. We'd hoped to be started work by the beginning of March, and we're just not quite there yet. Basically, it's a roughly 2-hour audit on site with an auditor from our team and a knowledgeable facilities manager from the housing provider who knows how the system works, how the building works, what its quirks are, and so on. Using a digital auditing tool to make sure that we're thorough, that we capture all the information that we need, that we have all that information in a way that's shareable and comparable, and so on. Just sort of summary of scope here, looking at the building envelope, looking at systems, domestic hot water, unit HVAC, common HVAC, lighting, distribution infrastructure, power, hot water, ducting, what the electrical capacity of the system is. So also if there are limitations in the street, in the vault, at the panel in the building, so we have a good understanding of all those things, since electrification is one of the things we're really focused on with this process. And then understanding any other physical conditions about the location of plant in the building, where there might be alternative options if there are some constraints to where the current equipment in the building is located, and so on. So that's the sort of rough sense of the process. Looks like I'm having a little problem changing slides here. What's going on? What's going on? Okay. I don't seem to have control of my slide deck. So let's try this again. Okay, there we go, that's better. So this is a kind of quick schematic of about typologies, the things we're trying to break down and get to. So ultimately, obviously, the goal here is we have this target of 32 EUI that we've set as the sort of where we're trying to get to with building performance, at least as a sort of straw person for what the building performance standard is going to look like for the city of Seattle, although that's still in process, and obviously there will be other components to it. But we've set that 32 EUI as a baseline. We've subdivided into 2 groups, all electric buildings and buildings that actually, this should not be gas, domestic hot water, but it should be buildings that have gas and electric. In the electric side, buildings that are below 32, we know we don't need to do anything with, they're already at the standard. So all electric buildings with an EUI higher than 32 is a category of interest. And based on some code issues and typical characteristics of buildings, there's a sort of watershed around 1945 that we split into 2. So pre-1945, post-1945. If we jump over into the gas buildings, we have gas buildings that only have gas for hot water. Everything else is electric. There, we actually raised the bar to 38 on the basis that we know that if we switch from gas hot water to electric heat pump hot water, we're going to pick up at least 6 EUI points, or we're going to eliminate at least 6 EUI points, generally more than that. So we wanted to focus on buildings where there was likely more to be done than just the domestic hot water switch. So split those categories. Again, if they're below 38, we decided not to look at them at this point. in order to conserve and focus resources as much as possible. So we've got buildings that have an EUI greater than 38, that have gas for hot water. Interesting category. What else do we have to do to those buildings to get them to target? And then again, the same split for pre and post 1945. And then once we get into space heat as well, at this stage in the benchmark analysis, we can't really differentiate whether a building has just common area gas heat or whether it also has gas heat in the residential units. So that'll be one of the things we'll clarify in dialogue with the providers, the facilities management teams, and obviously on site. But again, kind of breaking down into two subsections, and again by age as well. So those are all the categories. We've kind of lumped all of this gas for hot water and space heat into a single group for the present. And so our audit plan has given us a total of 15 buildings, 4 mid-rise and 1 high-rise in the post-1945 all-electric category. There weren't any pre-1945 buildings in the set. We have 1 mid-rise building in the pre-1945 range, and 1 low and 3 mid-rise buildings post-1945 that are all domestic hot water only, that is gas. And then in this gas for water and space heat, we have 1 low and 1 high-rise building pre-1945 and 3 mid-rise buildings post-1945. So that's the sample as we defined it, except as of a couple of hours ago, we've already determined that our selection of buildings actually isn't necessarily going to pencil out. Obviously, as we peel away the layers of the onion, we find a little more information every time we peel away a layer. But this is the group of buildings that we looked at, all electric buildings. We have these 5 properties from these 4 providers. In the gas domestic hot water only, we have these 5 properties from this group of owners, and gas domestic hot water and space heat, we have these 5 properties. Pretty good mixture if you look at the age ranges, the number of floors. As you can see, we've got pretty good variety across each sample set. Unit sizes vary fairly well. The EUI ranges, the darker the red, the higher the EUI. The ones that are blue are the ones we're seeing as the good performing buildings, but the ones that still need a little bit of work. As I say, as of this morning, we've already identified that in actual fact, 2 community roots projects, we're actually doing some work for community roots housing right now. And so somewhere else in our office was an awareness that Boylston, Howell and Bremer actually have either just undergone retrofits or are in the process of wrapping up retrofits right now, which unfortunately means that these EUIs are probably not reliable because they're based on historical data and those buildings are going to perform differently. So we may still look at them. We may have to replace those 2 in the set. We're still making some decisions about that. I'll hold on questions. I don't know if there are any questions, but I've only got, I think,
Alistair,
2 more. Oh, yes.
on those 2, if you already know the before and after, essentially maybe your audit's already done. And
Well, yes, except it's going to be a year before we have data on the after, right?
but we're not going to have data on any of the afters, I guess. So as long as we know the before, and you're doing certain work, but
Yeah,
anyway, just a thought.
yeah, it is a thought. With sort of, yeah, I'm waiting for feedback from the audit team on whether they think we should, accept them as they are, or whether we need to go look at different buildings. But yeah, it's a good point. Any other questions since we're kind of pausing at this point? Okay.
So Alistair, I just have one question. when I look at these, so there's 71. So for example, the Patrick Place Apartments, there's 71 units, and there's 489 square foot per unit. I'm trying to just get a quick glance of the overall size of the building itself. Is there a way to do that?
Yes, there is. I don't have that off the top of my head. It is in the data.
I'm not sure if that would be helpful or not, because then you could get a kind of a quick glance of, are we looking at a larger building versus a smaller
Yeah.
structure?
So we do have that. One of the things I should have pointed out is that we tried to keep the typologies as simple as possible.
Okay.
So we've focused on all residential buildings wherever possible. We do have some in the sample in order to increase the population, the size of the sample. We did look at buildings that had parking because that's a fairly predictable energy consumption. And we did, I think, look at buildings that had like a daycare or something similar in them, but we avoided buildings that had commercial space, retail space, and so on. So for the most part, the residential square footage totals are the vast majority of the use, and then there's one other small use in the space.
Okay, well, we got that data. Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, great.
I had a question about unreinforced masonry. We talked about that as kind of a related issue potentially. I know a building that has that issue, it may lead to a different kind of retrofit.
Yep.
They have better or worse opportunities. Right? Or have you identified any of these in that category? Or
I don't think we have at this point. So that'll certainly be one of the pieces to look at. And if we have to circle back and look at a different set of buildings, you know, if we've missed something here, that would certainly be one of the things that would be worth looking at.
I've got a question as well.
Mm-hmm.
So for some of these older buildings, like, 20, 30 years or older, was rehab work or like the last rehab included? Because that can change, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So one of the kind of checkpoints is, so this selection process was based on a full year of data, and I think it was the 2019 or 2020 reporting year. I'm not actually remembering which one we ended up with, but it was based on that. So we are back checking to make sure we understand, whether there was a retrofit that happened either before, during, or after that time frame, because that is obviously a significant factor.
Yeah, Alistair. Like, for example, I know that Meridian has a heat pump water heater installation.
Right.
Yeah. And a high EUI for having a heat pump water heater.
It is, in spite of that. Huh?
In spite of that, right?
Yeah. There are some interesting ones. It's the interesting ones to look at. Williams, I know, has a solar thermal system, and I don't know if it's actually actively used or not. And in actual fact, I don't know if there's anybody on from Plymouth Housing. I need a facilities contact of Plymouth.
I know it's a lead building.
It is.
And last I heard, they had no idea if the system was working or not, nor did they know anything about it.
It's up there on the roof, and they keep the door locked.
Are the pumps running?
Yeah, right. So far, Plymouth is the one group that I don't yet have a contact for. All the others we're connected with, but I need to get that sorted out soon. Okay.
Hey, Alistair, I'm working with them right now on a project, so I can provide some contacts for you.
Yeah, that would be great. Somebody on the asset management or facilities side is what I'm looking for.
Okay.
That'd be great. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, so moving on, and this is sort of covered all this on the front end, but just to wrap up, that we are doing QC of the benchmark data despite the great lengths the city has gone to try and make sure that all the benchmark data is good. We still occasionally go into buildings and find that there are meters that are not reporting, or they're reporting in the wrong place. So there's an element of making sure that that data is good. Obviously looking at envelope characteristics where appropriate, and that unreinforced masonry conversation would obviously pertain there. Understanding system characteristics, all the information that we don't necessarily get from either looking at benchmark data or looking at even as-built drawings, versus how does the building actually function now. Really the kind of key thing to be looking at. The electrical infrastructure is a big one, and one of the big costing issues that we're trying to wrap our arms around. In all electric buildings, the good news is at least we know there should be sufficient capacity, because we're already carrying all the load on the electrical system. With gas and electric buildings, there's a question of whether there's sufficient capacity on the building panel. Is that going to have to be increased? Is there a transformer limitation? Is there a bigger limitation at the street level, coordination with Seattle City Light on that front? And then understanding what the physical constraints are. What do the current plant locations look like? Do they lend themselves to a retrofit? Where would we put the exterior units for heat pump water heaters? Those kind of things are all the things that we want to understand, so that we can then take that away and start thinking about what are the cost implications to that, and what are the timing implications, so we can start thinking about prioritization and so on, and help make sure that the building performance standard policy accommodates affordable housing from that point of view. So yeah.
Alistair, on the electrical capacity infrastructure,
Yeah.
the capacity of each unit could be relevant as well if heat pumps or electric ranges are measures that are to be considered.
Yeah. And that all fortunately is fairly straightforward to gather. We're trying as much as possible to stay out of the units in order to expedite this process and simplify the process of doing the audit. Where there are vacant units, it'll be good to make a quick pass and understand those details, just so that we have them for the record. But as much as possible, we're trying to keep this as centrally focused as we can. Where we have in-unit equipment, be it a hot water tank, and so on, then those are things that we do want to be able to at least make sure we understand what those look like. Yeah, so just finally, the intent obviously is to understand what's behind the building data, so that we can then work on quantifying what the retrofit costs are going to be, and thinking about what the implications are from a timing perspective. What are the cycles that people are working with as far as they're dealing with replacement because of service life issues, dealing with recapitalization cycles, all of these things. Obviously, we've got to really kind of plug into the conversation in terms of understanding how to craft policy that is really going to be supportive of the affordable housing space, because there are some sort of unique challenges there compared to market rate housing. And yeah, I think that also then leads into thinking about what are the resource requirements in order to facilitate affordable housing in coming on board as far as the building performance standard is concerned. Because as much as we can set goals and deadlines and targets, there's then the challenge of how do we find the resources to make those things happen. So that's the last piece of the puzzle. And with that, I'll turn it over to questions, comments, feedback. I think generally, in terms of next steps, I'm particularly interested in well, certainly contact Ryan for Plymouth Housing Group, But if anybody has questions about, from their perspective, about what we've covered here in terms of what the audit process looks like, you know, it's always helpful to have a different perspective. There may well be gaps in the process. We do tend to find that we build an audit tool, we get on site, and there's some refinement that happens through the first couple of buildings until we really get things dialed in. And so any insight people might offer at this point where they have a question that might lead to a new data point that we should be picking up would be great.
Alistair, I had a question, just a question, I guess.
Yeah.
I didn't hear, you said you're not planning to go into units for the most part, looking at major systems. And I didn't hear any discussion of lighting. So
yeah.
Is that, are you assuming some of those things that energy saving opportunities there are not significant enough, or?
Well, so lighting is on the list as far as the audit scope is concerned.
Okay.
Inclined to think that a lot of those low-hanging fruit have been picked already, but you know, we may be wrong there. But I think that was the sort of base assumption, that there may not be a lot more to squeeze out there.
I guess the big question I would have is, do we know, or do we need to know if there are likely to be any cases where we do need to convert electric resistance heating to heat pumps? Is that an option we should be considering? And maybe you don't need to go on the units to know that, but
Right.
if you need to get an EUI down, and you know that's one option to do it. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, I think that's pretty similar to my, I guess it's more of a comment than a question, that, you know, if you, these buildings, I'm not sure what the quality or status of the MEP drawings are for these buildings. And so obviously looking at the schedules, but also, you know, I think if I remember correctly, HUD required audits for HUD-funded housing require 20% of the square footage to be audited, and that includes 100% of the common areas, but 20% of the units. And I think the reasoning for that is some of the things that Steve's saying here is that you know, you can get a sense of what's likely in the other units if you just do a quick scan. Maybe that's obvious.
Yeah.
I've got a kind of probably a derailing question. We're going through a rehab right now, and the significant costs that we're incurring just based on the age of the buildings and the required environmental testing. Are we including this as a potential cost for owners as part of this conversion?
The cost for environmental testing?
Lead
Yeah.
and asbestos, those, you know, and then of course we're running into math, you know, as we do this. Those costs are actually significantly higher than we'd anticipated, just to do some basic energy upgrades.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point. It's not specifically in the scope as we planned it at present, but I think we can use, you know, fairly solid data. It can be a sort of estimate that we can add on the back end. Yeah, it's a great point.
Thanks.
You know, I'd follow along with that and ask if there's a data point of whether the work would be done. And, you know, I'm assuming most of it would be done while the units are occupied. That's a schedule and cost impact. So.
Yeah. I mean, obviously that kind of in place retrofit issue adds a significant amount, particularly if you've got to get into the units. Any other thoughts? How we, Bambi, time-wise, I think, are we roughly on track? Kinda.
A little behind. We probably want to be moving forward if we're good,
Yeah.
but it's important to make sure, since you're going to be getting really in there, that anything that needs to come up, now is the moment, even if it seems like it wasn't related or anything like that, because we're going to be stepping into that next step, and it would be really great to have that top of mind info. So if anyone else has something to bring in there.
And I'll drop my email in the chat right now so that if anybody wants to follow up via email, they can do that.
All right, well, I think you're off the hook, Alistair.
Awesome.
We'll move forward to Sandra, and she's going to let us know what OSE has been hearing from their technical advisory group. So if you think this meeting is fun, you're not on the technical advisory group. That's probably even funner. So
Okay, they are so fun, just so fun. Let me get set up here. Okay, so title slide, moving on. So we thought it would be useful to share with this group some of, the initial feedback we're hearing from the technical advisory group that we are running. And so just as a background, the technical advisory group includes a number of representatives of building owners, service providers, engineers. Alistair's got his own category in sustainable design because we didn't know where to put him. Some organizational members, Carrie Mead from Smart Buildings Center. Can't never remember the C. Amy from Northwest Energy Coalition. Madeline is also participating from City Light, and then a labor representative. And so we have had 3 meetings so far, and first meeting was really fairly introductory in terms of us providing a lot of background. We've talked generally about sort of big picture policy pathways, what do we want this to do? And then more recently have been delving into a little bit more, what should this policy cover? Should it include energy? Should it, or should we leave that to the state's mandate? And if we, our target is emissions reduction, what does that mean? What are we trying to measure when we talk about emissions reduction? And then, starting next week, we're going to start talking a little bit more specifically about targets. And so I've put together just a couple of really quick slides here, calling from the information we've heard to date. And the first thing, just note that this technical advisory group is not a consensus group, and we're not expecting, the information to be a consensus. So just take that, keep that in mind with some of these items. So I'm trying to sort of take synthesis, but there's a lot of, but somebody else thought X. And, one of the big things we are hearing is keep it simple. I think there's a lot of concern with the complexity of the state's clean buildings mandate, and which requires meeting energy targets. It requires an operations and maintenance approach, and it requires an energy management plan. So, and that's also in reference to keeping it simple and not having lots of overlapping regulations. I think you can imagine, and you all, that it just, regulations are a boon for helping our world and keeping us all safe, and they're a burden in terms of owners. The other big thing I think we've been hearing is that owners really want to know what they're going to need to do. So we've heard from some folks, in other cities that, they have the first targets are identified, but they don't know what's coming down the pike. And so, they just want to be able to manage their assets towards what is going to be expected of them. And also, we've been hearing this here, you can't just have the regulation, you need very strong support, both technically helping owners to comply And, you know, financially, are there incentives? And where can, you know, the resources come from? And just noting here also some comments about if there are fines for this policy, then can we reinvest that back in helping owners to comply? Concerns about how a policy like this might influence tenants, will cost trickle down, concerns with potential gentrification and displacement, noting that compliance will be, you know, for any of these regulations, especially hard for owners of smaller buildings. I mean, Steve talked about just the difficulty of having capacity to respond to a survey, and that will really need to provide greater assistance. The flip side of that, we also heard to, you know, the policy that we're working towards is mostly focused on buildings 20,000 square feet and larger, and just wanting to be sure that there isn't inequity in terms of like the buildings in the city of Seattle at large, that there are emissions reductions opportunities in smaller buildings, and that should be considered. So we don't give single family a free pass kind of a thing. And then concerns about workforce and whether there's adequate workforce. I think we've been hearing, you know, it's hard to get a contractor, right? And we're finding that with some of our city programs. Little bit more specifically on some of the metrics and whether is that, you know, there is a state energy mandate, energy performance standard mandate. And so don't duplicate that. Don't, you know, right now, the energy targets that the state has applied to commercial buildings over 50,000 square feet. And so consideration that the city might want to put energy targets in place for those buildings that aren't covered by the state. So, which then also includes multifamily. So the state's targets the state standards don't include multifamily. There is new legislation that has just passed that does extend some of the requirements of the state mandate to smaller buildings and to multifamily, but it's extending the operations requirements and the energy performance or the energy plan, but not yet defining targets. So just, you know, really thinking that energy is important, but don't duplicate. And here's where there's but. Some folks said, you know, really just focus on carbon, focus on greenhouse gas emissions, let the utility incentives cover efficiency, and you're going to get efficiency even as you're focusing on carbon. And then the flip side is state standards, great, but they're not enough. And Seattle, you know, is with the energy code leads the way. So maybe Seattle should lead the way here and really think about stronger efficiency standards. In terms of what types of emissions might be measured in this sort of a policy in which we are, you know, this is supposed to be a carbon-based performance standard policy, really focusing on, you know, what is burned on site, you know, on-site domestic hot water, heating systems, and district systems. So say you're hooked up to a district steam system that is gas-fired. Generally, given that we have a carbon neutral electric source in Seattle City Light, it was felt that that sort of complicated the issue and wasn't really necessary, with that the emissions from the electricity being essentially zero. And flip side, because there's always, you know, counters, is, you know, maybe there's a fairness optics to this, that we don't just want to exclude, electricity, and it might also be part of encouraging solar. And then also some discussion around, you know, owners who work in multiple markets are interested, you know, they're dealing with emissions from electricity. And so it might be just helpful for them. There were comments about, you know, making sure we normalize our metrics, especially for density. And that came up specifically in relation to affordable housing, where you tend to have more units. And maybe, you know, typically like with an energy performance standard, we use energy use per square foot, or with a carbon standard, we might use carbon emissions per square foot, maybe normalizing that and using something that's like a per person or per bedroom, and so that, you know, dense affordable housing doesn't get penalized. And then consider compliance at a portfolio scale, maybe for larger public entities like UW or the schools. You know, if you get savings in one building, but not in another, the impact is the same. And, you know, I think that could be considered as an option for, you know, affordable housing portfolio owners as well. And we also talked about what other types of considerations are important for a policy that's looking at performance, and whether we should consider the leakage, you know, refrigerant leakage and the emissions impacts from that. Should we make sure that we're addressing indoor air quality? And I think here we're kind of getting into this. We want to keep things simple and, again, avoid regulatory overlap. So like leave the refrigerant regulation to the state. And, you know, health is being covered by the energy code when upgrades are made. But there's also some pushback there too, that if we're going to have a policy that impacts moving towards greater refrigerant usage and moves towards greater work in buildings, we might want to figure out how those issues can be addressed. So these are, you know, these are just some initial thoughts, and I don't know if Alistair or Madeline have any comments, additional comments to share, anything big that you've gleaned that you think is important, but just thought it was good to share with you all what's been happening with your counter group, if you will. And then happy to hear any additional questions or input that you may have based on that.
I think that was a great summary, Sandra. I'm not thinking of anything significant that you missed there.
I like the detail of what your steps are, where you're at, and that's very helpful to track where you're at.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, if that, you know, anything comes to mind later, you know, certainly you can reach out to myself and I can forward on to Sandra, and Sandra can also, you know, take your email. So it looks like we have a link inside the chat for the next exercise, which is going to be led by Steve. Our favorite activity, doing the little mural, moving all of the, you know, moving all of the little boxes around and getting all our ideas in. So something a little bit more audiovisual for the moment. So go ahead and hit that link. And then Steve, you can go ahead and lead us into that. We're going to be basically talking about beginning that outline for our policy recommendations. You know, what should that organizing framework be right now as we think about it? What are those buckets that we are going to be having? And looking for a lot of great feedback on that.
Yeah, thanks, Bambi. So, you know, the ultimate outcome we're looking for is, what does the affordable housing community suggest the Office of Sustainability should consider in its policy development? And a lot of that we're going to learn from the audits, but I think many of us and you all have been probably thinking about this, and something's come to mind right away. And we thought we could start to develop a kind of a list or an outline of potential recommendations or support requests, and then have the next couple of months to sort of work it through and determine how feasible things are, what things might cost, what the benefits are, et cetera, so that a final set of recommendations can be forwarded to the Office of Sustainability. It also gives the office the ability to look at what we're thinking and consider it in their planning. So have you all been able to get into the mural? I don't know if you all are familiar with mural, but essentially all these little colored squares are Post-it notes that you can click on and type in. And I think we're going to do mostly a group brainstorm here. So what I have laid out is, on the far left are categories we may want to think about when we think about how to influence this policy, how it affects affordable housing.
Steve,
So,
just quickly, when I landed on the mural, it's the same sheet that we have the typology stuff on at the top of the sheet, and I landed in that top left corner. So you might just wonder whether it's worth checking that what you're talking about is lower
I
down
can
the page.
summon you guys. I'm summoned everyone, so you should all be seeing what I'm seeing now. Yes.
Okay,
You're seeing.
I wasn't, but
Okay. Okay. So on the left side are some of the categories we're talking about. So it could be support for management and planning for retrofits and upgrades, technical assistance for the upgrades themselves, grants to help pay for certain things. What would those things be? Financing. So grants I think of as direct payments for something. Financing is financing. How do I pay for this over time? Exemptions, should certain things that should be exempt entirely that might not be exempt for non-multifamily or non-affordable housing. And what about the policy and metrics itself? What is required and what is it required of? So I gave an example there of, perhaps EUI should be measured per bedroom rather than per square foot, as Sandra highlighted earlier. So that would be a policy, a difference in the policy. So first, let me ask if there are any thoughts of other general categories, and we don't have to stick to these anyway, but any thoughts on big buckets that you're thinking of that we may want to consider? Okay, I'm not hearing anything right now. Let's start just by brainstorming. And as a brainstorming exercise, there are no bad ideas, and we just want to start tracking them. We'll probably use this more to create an outline than necessarily to include every specific idea, but we won't lose anything. And we don't have to follow the order of categories here. So this is, so I'm going to give you all a minute to think. If you want to jot down right on this sheet, you can pick any square, click on it, and you can type. So let me give you all a minute to think about it. Again, we're trying to say what's the advice we're going to give the office sustainability with respect to affordable housing. let's take another minute or two. But don't feel like you ever have to stop.
Steve, could you repost the mural link? I lost it somehow and now I can't
Sure.
get back to it.
I can
Picked-
easily.
I accidentally exited the meeting.
There you go. Okay, why don't we continue, but let's open up to a general discussion. I think we'll just go down the categories from top to bottom. If you've written something down, share it. If you have a new idea or want to build on a previous idea, just shout it out. So let's start with ideas for management and planning. So I put standards for CNAs that include energy and emission goals. So to kind of expand the way CNAs are done and make sure there's those performing them, understand what they need to do to help building owners align with the building performance standard policy. Someone else had planning for follow-up. Want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that was me, Steve, and just want to make sure there's a plan in place that, you know, we get it to the place, we've done the retrofit, make sure there's a plan down the road to follow up that may include some financial support.
Right. Okay, and then technical assistance. Property modeling. Seth, maybe? Alistair, who did that?
Wasn't me.
I guess, right.
Oh, it was not me.
That wasn't you, okay.
No.
So property modeling, so somebody want to volunteer that one or take a shot?
I mean, I could,
Go for it.
I could speak to it, but it's not mine.
Oh, actually, that was mine. Sorry. Yeah, that's just simply the initial cost associated with doing. You have initial underwriting for some project you're working on, and then there's a usually substantial cost associated with getting into the details of how to do an appropriate retrofit. That is above and beyond what people normally assume or have in-house capability of doing. Particularly the latter, normally you don't have the in-house capability. So, you're writing a check for, whatever, $5 grand, $8 grand, to even get to a potential answer.
Right.
Yeah, I love that comment actually, because I want to just add on to it a little bit to get proper. I mean, I think most of us know this here, but to get proper load calculations for heating and cooling is, I mean, it's really important to reduce the amount of tonnage for heat pumps. And if we can reduce tonnage for heat pumps, then we reduce the risk of refrigerant leaks as well.
So Alistair, I'm wondering if part of what we learned from the audits is how to do audits. How to do this modeling most efficiently to get to the targets we're trying to get to? And what does it cost you? So might be interesting as another outcome of this process.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Finding out what's important, how to be as efficient as possible, and then how to use the data effectively. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the key.
Relatedly, and this might be just a gap in my knowledge, but how are federal installation grants applied to low-income housing? And are they?
Insulation, is that what you said?
Yeah, installation, like
Yeah,
length.
so Jennifer Lebrecht, why don't you answer that?
I can answer that. So we, the Office of Housing, through the Department of Commerce, the Office of Housing, sorry, has funding for low-income weatherization, which we use both in single-family homes and then in multifamily homes. That funding is governed by like a several hundred-page document from the Department of Commerce. So essentially, we have staff who do energy audits, who create scopes of work, and then on the multifamily side, provide essentially technical assistance and kind of project management oversight while those measures are installed. We contract directly with the property owner, so we have a funding agreement. The property owner is responsible for bidding and contracting the work according to the scope of work and the technical specifications in their contract. Does that answer your question, Seth?
Yeah, absolutely. And I assumed it was something like that, and that's great, because I think, assuming we launch a Clean Buildings Accelerator or other types of assistance for this type of work, then connecting those types of resources post-audit and pre-design is really important, right? So we get the audit, we are able to understand the condition of the envelope, right? Doesn't need additional new windows or insulation or caulking for that matter, and that flows into the load calculations, et cetera.
There's a lot of complexities to work through there. I mean, but I think it's a great point. Yep.
Well, I guess what I mean is, like, I know that OSC is thinking about a hub and spoke model for their Clean Buildings Accelerator, and so they can perhaps be the hub to make sure that those connections are made. What do you think, Nicole?
I'm nodding my head. Yes, it's an important need and something we should definitely consider in the accelerator model. Yep.
Okay, let's move on. Environmental testing. Somebody want to talk about that, or?
Oh, that's me.
Julie.
Hi. Yeah. Sorry. Can we just kind of include this with, I think, going back to having that support, possibly considering adding consultants who have that higher level of knowledge that are paid for, because this is a significant burden just to find somebody who's capable of doing all this stuff. And it requires us to already have this knowledge. And I think especially smaller landlords are going to have a really hard time meeting that requirement. So if there's like a list, or if the city's providing some technical support and resource, that'd be great. And that would include environmental testing, right? Because I think we're all going to be surprised by the amount of cost that's going to be incurred. I'm telling you, we're all going to be shocked at the amount of cost that's going to be incurred with the meth in our unit.
Would you need, if you do find those things, they can be, as you mentioned, costly. Do you think we should also add this under grants and or financing?
It's going to be a lot bigger than we think. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and then I did actually add that in, maybe consultant fee grants to assess compliance needs, right? Like, we've got to start the pathway somewhere.
And I was wondering with the audits, I know that it may not be able to put a price on all these, but even a flag for what types of projects kind of trigger the environmental testing, because I really appreciate you bringing this up, Julie, because there's always cost, and this is a new thing, and we can think about in the context of support. So kind of learning more about the trigger for this, and when it's needed, if that can come out of the audit or just other sources from this group.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Nicole. And I think one of the things, part of the goal of this audit, these are not going to be, full audits that are going to feed the design and implementation process, right? We're trying to do a fairly light touch to understand what the environment looks like, so that we can start getting some ROM estimates. But there'll be a whole bunch of buildings that we don't need to go deep into, that everything is central, and we're upgrading the domestic hot water. Maybe we're upgrading the ventilation system. We're not going into units and doing anything significant. There's a whole lot of logistical issues that come up as soon as you take that next step. And so understanding what the potential is there is part of that differentiation. On top of that is then the consideration of, okay, so if we're going into this building at whatever is the appropriate time, should we also be capturing those other things? Is this the opportunity to roll up a whole lot of resources and get better ventilation in the building and fix the toxic, lead issue and so on, but understand what the implications of that are, and how that relates to an in-place retrofit and how you're going to go about doing that and so on. So yeah, I think that's all built into the conversation, but all great considerations.
Well, I think as long as we're talking building systems, that we're not talking about going into units, that's a whole different matter, right? But as soon as we start going into units, there's a requirement that's going to hit. And you all need to be aware of what the additional costs that come with that, if it hits that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we're conscious of those realities so that we can differentiate the trigger point that says, this is what we need to do now for the BPS. This may be a whole other issue that we don't touch at the moment. Or on the other hand, maybe this is an issue that you're going to do this at recapitalization and you're going to also do all these other things as well. But, to make that something that's a conscious part of the decision tree, I think is the goal.
Great. So anyone else want to call out specific things in this technical assistance line?
Historic preservation.
So explain what you would be looking for under technical assistance and how that would affect the project.
Someone to help us navigate through the requirements through the board or whatever that we have to respond to or appeal to get some work done.
Right.
Yeah, I had a similar comment that essentially summarized my earlier comment. I put it up into the pink area, up into the planning and management, because it's sort of straddles that line. I think the historic preservation does as well. Is that assistance in management and planning, or is that actual technical assistance? I don't know, but the point is that I think that perhaps the accelerator or something out of the accelerator could assist with that.
Right. Okay. I think the others are fairly self-explanatory. Let's talk a little bit about the grant line. So grants for consultant fees. I put in grants for electrical infrastructure. I was thinking about how, the difference in costs for buildings can be dramatically different depending on whether you have to put electrical infrastructure in or not, whether you're remediating for asbestos and lead or not, right? So it needing to do fairly deep efficiency upgrades and electrification could be very unequal building to building. And I was thinking of one way to sort of equalize that is have grants available for the electrical infrastructure, which brings all buildings up to sort of the same level. So everyone's maybe having to pay for equipment and figure out how to do it, and there's some benefits. But in terms of getting up to that, getting the foundation built, perhaps there are grants to help with that. That's what I was thinking there. And that maybe ties into someone put premium versus normal building replacements. I don't know who put that, but Does that sort of speak to the same kind of thing?
Yeah, that was my comment. Yes, the gap that exists there. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So, great. Should we talk about financing? Anyone want to call anything out here? I see long-term below market rate financing.
That was mine. Again, similar to the theme we were just talking on, and this would be a mechanism to solve it. You know, some of it could be a combination between a partial grant combined with, you know, long-term below market financing to spread the cost, you know, because you're going to get hopefully some benefit too. And that may come, you may be able to take that benefit and extend it out. It's the concept of CPACE, but at even a more enhanced level and amortization, and maybe lower total cost with a grant combination if you're achieving something tied to, you know, carbon metrics or something like that.
Right.
I have to say that the concept of financing in general makes me really nervous. And, you know, I don't think any of these arguments are new, but much affordable housing cannot support debt payments. That's, you know, why it receives public subsidy. There might be some types that could support an additional debt payment, but many cannot. So, and then, you know, even when we get, for example, the option to delay compliance to fit into the tax credit period, you know, when we come to resyndication, the property has a lot of needs. And I think what we heard last time, I think from Marty at Bellwether, was that even at resyndication, you know, it's difficult to cover the amount of property needs with the funding or the financing that's available through the resyndication. So adding to the scope of work, you know, doesn't really, tax credits are an option, but it doesn't really solve a problem because, you know, there's still more work that needs to be done in the building than there is money. So I think we want to think really carefully about what buildings would be a good fit for financing, what solution, you know, how much of a solution that would really be, and not put it out there as sort of an option that's ultimately not going to work for a lot of properties.
I've added question marks to honor your question. I do hear you. So I wonder if the option to delay compliance could also be just a planning and management issue. So it could be that, not that the tax credit, when you refi, that there's enough money to pay for it, but you also don't want to have to comply with something when you're going to refinance the building in 5 more years, right? So maybe those are two different, maybe delaying compliance could be in two different places. Maybe it doesn't belong in financing, but it belongs in planning management.
I would also, I mean, not to be argumentative here, but I mean, my entire business was around selling and financing tax credit and affordable properties. And there are billions and billions of properties that we've sold and financed that actually could achieve more financing associated with them. I know there's a lot in the city of Seattle that cannot, particularly those that, you know, are serving, you know, populations that are 30, 40, you know, percent AMIs, you know, in that range. Those definitely fall into a category where, I mean, they can't, they need pure grant funding, right? But if you get properties that in a high income area where your AMIs are 50 and 60%, no, you can't take on a whole lot more debt service. But, you know, if you have it where you haven't had a bunch of soft funding to be put in place originally, now you're starting to talk about a little different animal. I'm not saying that, you know, for instance, CDA has those properties or anything, but they do exist in a pretty large percentage associated with the affordable housing portfolio writ large. Maybe not particularly the ones that you guys are looking at for the city.
Yeah, I wonder if that, and I appreciate that point. You know far more about tax credits than I do, Robert. You know, we find the 9% tax credits in Seattle go entirely towards, you know, permanently supportive housing.
Yeah.
And I'm less clear in the 4%. I checked in with our capital investments manager and I was like, hey, when you have projects that re-syndicate, do they come to the Office of Housing for funding as well during re-syndication? And the answer was yes. So that tells me that, you know, the re-syndication, the financing provided through the re-syndication is not sufficient. I agree with you. I can't say that that's in 100% of the cases, but it's certainly in some.
So let's, I'm gonna play moderator here. So we'll get these on the list for things to think more about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's good targets we can deal with.
Under exemptions, I see exemptions for buildings that don't have the vault or electrical capacity or space. Partial credit for best efforts. Does somebody want to explain that one a little bit?
Yeah, that's me. It's just, you know, a lot of these buildings we've been talking about have these premiums, and you don't want to discourage them from not doing anything if they can't get to that full. So is there a way to at least give them credit for doing the best they can with the existing building that they have? Not sure how to articulate that.
Yeah, I call that the cost ineffectiveness test. So at what point do the costs become ineffective in spending more money?
Correct.
I think those are, and, you know, I think of, you know, there was some 15-story high rise with steam heat that, you know, I don't know how you retrofit that. Or you can do it, but it would be crazy expensive. And at what point do you draw the line and just say, you just can't do it? So the cost ineffective. Historic buildings, that's a great one. A menu idea, sort of aligned with the best effort. So saying that don't do nothing, but maybe you can't do everything, or you come as close as you can based on some standard. Great ideas. And then in the policy and metrics, I already went over the first one. Carbon emission targets by year. I think that's already being considered. Measure by assumed occupancy.
Hey, I'm sorry. Could someone actually clarify that one a little bit?
That was me. That was something akin to like New York local law 97, where, you know, your carbon emission needs to be at X level by X year, or you have a,
Not like by the vintage of the building and when it was built. This is like you ratchet up over time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or cool. Down.
Or down as the yes, thank you. Because that's where we're going.
Hopefully not.
Great. I think, and then I move that option to delay compliance to fit into rather than to tax credits. I'm going to put into remodel plans, perhaps, is maybe a better way to do it, whether it's tax credits or not. Major remodels. Other thoughts and ideas here? Is this helpful?
Okay. I'm just thinking, Steve, I haven't weighed in on ideas because these are your ideas to us, but just wanted to point out that in some of the other policies, and actually even in tune-ups, there's exemption categories, but then there's also alternative compliance. So there could be a bucket that are things that, like, I love the spirit of the partial credit for best efforts, like that might be an alternative compliance type of thing, or the option to comply, as opposed to straight out like there's no way this building can do it at all, which might be an exemption. So just it's another policy bucket.
Great, thank you. Okay. I think what I'll do is try to group some of these that are the similar. And I think we'll probably, the team will look at this and refine it a bit, share it with OSE, and probably come back to this again once we learn more from the audits for sure, and beyond. So Bambi, I'm going to turn it back to you with 5 minutes to spare, I think, unless there's other questions or comments from this.
Yeah, we're so good. We're ahead of schedule. The one thing that I would like to ask, just to give a minute for an answer, is there anything that we're not addressing in terms of what we're doing with the agendas right now? Is there some topic on top of mind where you're like, you know what, we really need to get to that next month in April? If there's anything that comes to mind, please reach out to me. You know, we do have our strategy team meeting. We try to figure out what's going to be the best thing to do to make sure we're making the best use of your time. But sometimes, you know, something's outside of all of us at that meeting. And if there is anything that we're missing here, anything we haven't touched, anything where you're like, huh, I hope that's going to happen at some point between now and June, make sure to reach out to me and we can get that into the hopper. Other than that, I feel like a magic, like, you know, fairy godmother here, and I can give you 5 minutes of your life back. You could like have a bathroom break, or, you know, I mean, stand up versus sitting down, something amazing. So yeah, I think that's it for us. Thank you all so much for being here. And, you know, HDC members, I hope to see you at the quarterly member meeting on Friday. And we hope to see you, maybe even meet you in person, maybe even say hello, if you want to come to our annual celebration that happens at the end of the month. Other than that, everyone have a great day.
Thanks much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.